The Chair by R. Chetwynd-Hayes. The old man in the second-hand furniture shop had a pointed grey beard, a mass of white hair, and spoke with a faintly foreign accent. The chair came from a house with an unfortunate history. This tantalizing statement was further enhanced when the old fellow refused to elaborate further, but I dismissed it as nothing more than a rather unique sales gimmick, for who can resist buying an item of furniture with a mysterious past? "The gentleman will note," he said, patting the winged back, "the brocade, which is so marvellously well preserved, the claw feet, the graceful curve of the arms. It is indeed a bargain at £80. "Early 18th century," I murmured, determined to appear well versed in antiquarian lore. £50. He shrugged thin, bowed shoulders. "The gentleman drives a hard bargain, and as a sign of deep respect, I will reduce the price to £70. We finally settled for 65. The brocade, as the old man had said, was in an excellent state of preservation, its pattern of tiny pink roses only slightly faded, the silver background still gleaming with a satisfying sheen. One more item. My bedroom was now a haven carved out of the rock of time. Tudor bed, early Georgian wardrobe and dressing table, Queen Anne cabinet, Jacobean commode, and now the chair. I was not certain of its age, maybe Queen Anne, most likely the first George, certainly not later. Now I could sleep and dream of ladies in long flowing dresses, and of gentlemen in black velvet doublets and crimson hose. The realm of what might have been was so much more interesting than a world of roaring machines, rustling income tax forms, and flickering television screens. Yesterday the great walked with earth-shaking steps. Today the small scamper across an asphalt desert and leave a trail of corruption in their wake. I lay in my vast four-poster bed, monarch of a kingdom that was born when the Tudors strutted the corridors of Whitehall. In my hands was a facsimile of a newspaper dated August 28th, 1828. I experienced a thrill of delicious ecstasy while I read an account of the execution of William Corder, he of Red Barn fame, a mere 150 years ago, but a sufficiently long journey back along the eternal road to create a buffer of years between me and the age of mechanical confusion. I turned a page. The paper acquired a crease. I shook it, lowered it, then raised it again. But the threefold action had been fatal to my peace of mind, for as I had momentarily looked over the lowered newspaper, I had seen a woman seated in the chair. The tiny print became a jumbled mass of black lines. The paper trembled as I tried to dismiss that brief vision of a long white face and large dark eyes that had glittered, or maybe glared, from beneath slim black brows. I did not think that perhaps my faculties had become deranged, or toy with words such as optical illusion, imagination, and other like clichés. One does not practice self-deception under these circumstances, for the human eye and brain are loyal servants and rarely attempt to deceive their master. No, from behind my frail barricade of paper, I knew there was a strange woman seated in the chair, and she had not entered through the doorway, or crawled from under the bed, or slid silently from the wardrobe. She had suddenly come into being. I lowered the newspaper inch by inch, and gradually unveiled the face of truth. She was so still. A study in black and white, black hair, brows and dress, white face, hands and shoes. The long face might have been thought beautiful by those who like smooth, unlined skin and thin, so red lips. I noticed that the hands, which lay one on each knee, were extraordinarily long, and on the left middle finger was a large stone, possibly a ruby, encased in a gold filigree setting. We stared at each other, and her dark eyes did not blink, only glittered with a faintly mischievous gleam, or so it seemed to me, who sat upright, wrapped in the cold mantle of fear, and maybe there was a pale ghost of a smile twisting the thin red lips. Then she raised her right hand and beckoned. It was not an imperious gesture, rather a coy invitation, a seductive bending of 4 fingers, a subtle command that it would be well to obey. But prolonged fear curdles and becomes anger. Suddenly I was yelling, mouthing obscenities, aware of a burning hatred for that seated figure which did nothing more than beckon. My outstretched hand gripped a gilt bedside clock, and I hurled it straight at the white face. She vanished just before the clock crashed against the chair back. I am a person who can come to terms with any situation. I remember being interviewed by an officers' selection board during the war, when a stupid old fool of a colonel asked me, "What would you do if you met a battleship, walking across a field?" I gave the only possible positive answer, "Find out why." It was not, of course, the answer they had wanted. I was supposed to smile and say, "Take more water with it," or some such nonsense. But I still maintain that such a phenomenon would have aroused the curiosity of a reasonably intelligent man, once he had mastered his quite natural alarm. I believe there are only 2 basic laws in the universe, cause and effect. Let us take the cause of the walking battleship. One must assume that the vessel had acquired legs. Were they formed from metal or flesh and blood? The gentlemen on the selection board, for some reason best known to themselves, declined to answer this simple question, and in fact refused to pursue the matter any further. But if I had been supplied with this basic information, there is no doubt in my mind that I would have solved the mystery, and so demonstrated my gift for dealing with any untoward contingency. Thus, on the morning after my disconcerting experience, I first admonished myself for having given way to alarm and despondency, then set out to discover why a ghost should haunt a second-hand piece of furniture. I examined the chair most thoroughly. The upholstery was not stained in any way. There was no sign of damage, repair, recent French polishing on legs or visible woodwork. Nothing, in fact, that might supply even an irrational explanation. The seat, back, and arms were well padded with horsehair, I imagined, and which appeared to have lost none of its resilience. A good, solid chair, with plenty of room to stretch out, curl up, sleep in it, read, do whatever you like, but certainly not intended to haunt in. The physical examination of the chair, if I may be permitted the expression, was now complete, and for all the good it had done me, I might as well have gone for a long walk. I then passed on to a line of reasonable conjecture. Sometime during the past 200 years, a woman with a beautiful, long, white face had sat in the chair and saturated the upholstery with her personality. On occasion, someone tuned in on the right wavelength had recreated her image. Last night, that person had been me, and when I threw the clock, the line of contact had been broken. I felt quite pleased with my reasoning powers, and did a little dance round the room. Within the space of 10 minutes I had solved a mystery that would have had a normal person gibbering in the fireplace or smashing a valuable chair to pieces with an axe. "Fear is the child of stupidity," I shouted. "Reason is the voice of sanity," and rejoiced in a feeling of superiority over the brainless ants that crawl over the surface of this planet. Then I stopped and stared at the chair with dilated eyes. Wait a minute. The woman had beckoned to me. But had she? Could she not have been beckoning to someone long dead? A mere reenactment of a scene that had taken place in the dim past. I breathed a deep sigh of relief, and again took pleasure in my keen deductive powers. Sherlock Holmes would have undoubtedly booted that fool Watson down the stairs had I been around at the time. I could hardly wait for nightfall and the possible reappearance of the apparition, which I could now watch with detached interest, completely free from brain-sapping, brain-freezing fear. Not a sight or sign of her did I see for 3 weeks. It has been my unhappy experience that you can never rely on women, be they dead or alive, time images or just whispers in a dark room. When you expect them, they never turn up. When you least want them, there they are, standing on the doorstep, armed with a night bag and a seductive smile. I sat up in bed and stared at that chair for night after night, and it remained as empty as a Russian church on May Day. I gave her every encouragement. "Come on, you silly cow. Don't be shy. Show yourself." Finally, although I did not give up, I began to lose interest, rather like a lover whose advances are not so much repelled as ignored. If a fire is not fed, it eventually dies down and becomes a mass of smouldering embers. At the end of the 3rd week, I was forced to realize my mistaken assumption. We all think that ghosts can materialize only during the hours of darkness, and that daytime is a kind of non-spook period, when the only spirits that are worthy of concern are kept in bottles. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with sunlight streaming through my nylon curtains, I walked into my bedroom, and there she was, seated in the chair and staring at me with those never-to-be-forgotten eyes. I stopped and was quite unable to subdue a sudden wave of fear. Then I remembered she was only a time image, no more real than an old movie projected on a screen long after the actors were dead. I said, "So there you are," and sat down on the bed. I decided she had been, a most beautiful woman. The long white face would defy the cruel fingers of time until the late middle age, and then there would have been a graceful wilting, a gradual transformation. I do not know how long we sat and looked at each other, only, of course, she was not looking at me, but presently her arm came up, and the hand beckoned, inviting me or someone to come forward and possibly be suitably rewarded for walking a few faltering steps. I laughed. It was really remarkable to feel so fearless, to view this apparition as merely an object for investigation. I said, "I wonder, little lady, who he was. I take it you are beckoning to a man." Shameless hussy. Did he obey? He'd have to be a fool not to. The beckoning went on, arm bending, fingers almost clenching, then opening. The continuous gesture was becoming a little boring. I decided to experiment. I got up and walked towards the fireplace, then looked back over one shoulder. Her head had turned, and the eyes were still watching me, and the left hand, the non-beckoning one, was stretched out, as though she were appealing to me not to go away. And fear came riding in on a wave of anger. I shouted, "Go away, damn you! I won't be badgered by a patch of coloured air! Go!" She left. She vanished, left an empty chair and a man who cried out, "I didn't mean it! Come back! Please come back!" The summer died, and autumn turned green leaves to russet brown, then sent a chill north wind to chase them along country lanes and urban pavements. And during all that time the chair remained empty. Gradually, I came to accept the awful truth. I had fallen in love with a shadow, a beckoning figure that had as much reality as the Mona Lisa, Venus de Milo, or, and I kept harking back to this theme, a beautiful heroine in an old film. Do not think for one moment that I had surrendered to this humiliating passion without putting up a soul-shaking fight. While I lay in bed, day after day, week after week, eating little, unwashed, unshaven, watching an empty chair, I cursed myself and the long-dead woman and tried to climb back onto the throne of reason. One night I moved into a spare room, determined not to look upon that cursed chair for at least 3 weeks, confident that it needed only willpower to set me free again. But in less than 10 minutes I was tormented by the thought that she might have returned, was sitting in a darkened room, beckoning, and I would not be there. I unlocked the door, ran into the room that might have been my haven in a world gone mad, and sank down before the empty chair. My voice went screaming back along the misty avenue of time. "Come back! Drive me mad, but come back!" At the end of the 3rd month, tired of appealing to a recalcitrant shade who refused to put in an appearance, I decided on a course of action that was long overdue. I went back to the second-hand furniture shop. The old man came out of the shadows and peered at me over a pair of rimless spectacles. "How can I serve the gentleman?" The mere sight of his silly, goat-like face, his frail, bent body, made the smouldering rage that had been fed by months of humiliation blaze up into a searing flame. I spat the question at him. "The chair! Where did you get it?" He shrugged, a helpless gesture that brought him to the threshold of death. "I have sold so many chairs, sir, I cannot remember where they all came from." I thrust my face forward until it was a bare 6 inches from his own. I saw the weak, watery eyes, the flabby, wrinkled skin, and I hated him with a hatred that passed all understanding. "You said it came from a house with an unfortunate history." He sighed, then turned away and began to walk between an agglomeration of rubbish that littered the floor, and I had the ridiculous idea that if I took my eyes from him for so much as a single second, he would turn into a lamp standard or just disappear. "All houses have an unfortunate history, as the gentleman must be aware. Tragedy walks in every room." I took 3 long paces forward and grabbed his shoulder, then swung him round. He did not appear to be frightened or even surprised at my aggressive action. "Don't play with words. You know the chair I mean. Where did it come from?" He eased his shoulder from my grip and stared wistfully out of the window. I had to strain my ears to catch the whispered words. "It was pulled down, as the gentleman will find out if he but walks to Bedford Park. Now 1,000 little brick boxes cover its graveyard." I said softly, appealingly, "The chair was in this shop. You must have seen her." His eyes were faintly mocking when he looked up. "I am a very old man. She had no power over me. I would suggest the gentleman go to the Twilight Home. There is an old lady there. A Miss Pirbright. She may remember." The Twilight Home for distressed ladies, I was not aware that such places still existed, was an old house that loomed up from behind a curtain of high walls. I pressed the brass bell button, and, trembling with excitement, although I had not the faintest idea what questions I was to ask, or the kind of reception I would receive, waited for the grim green door to open. I was soon confronted by a tall girl, attired in a spotless white overall, whose dark face resembled a beautiful brown-tinted mask. She smiled gently and asked, "You wish to see someone, sir?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, a Miss Pirbright." Her smile deepened. "Won't you come in?" I followed her along a path that was bordered on either side by flowering shrubs, then up a flight of steps and into the house. When we entered a spacious hall, she stopped and looked at me. "Are you a relative, sir?" "No, an old friend." She nodded slowly. "I see. It is a very long time since Miss Pirbright received a visitor, and she's very old, over 90, I believe, so do not be surprised if she does not recognize you." I would have been more surprised if she had, so did not comment, but followed the nurse down a long passage and out into an enclosed veranda. Here a number of ancient ladies sat in deep armchairs, some staring blankly out of the windows, others reading or knitting, while a pitiful few, talked with thin, querulous voices. Miss Pirbright was tucked away in a far corner. Extremely old age can be beautiful. It can also be pathetic, frightening, or repulsive. Miss Pirbright was all three, a bundle of skin and bones wrapped in a tartan shawl, a wrinkled monkey face surmounted by a mist of sparse white hair. The nurse gently shook one bony shoulder and all but shouted, "Miss Pirbright! Miss Pirbright, you have a visitor!" The head came up, and a harsh voice pronounced a single word. "What?" "A visitor for you. Isn't that nice?" The faded blue eyes examined me with faint interest. Then the voice found another word. "Visitor?" The nurse smiled at me ruefully. "It's not one of her best days, I'm afraid. Don't tire her. I'll be back in a little while." I sat down on a nearby chair and tried to control my rising anger, for how could I possibly get information from this animated corpse without shaking it until the toothless gums rattled? But I tried. "Miss Pirbright," I said, imitating the nurse's shout, "did you once live in an old house in Bedford Park?" I watched the tiny, claw-like hands pluck at the shawl fringe, and when it seemed as if there was to be no answer, repeated the last two words several times. "Bedford Park! Bedford Park!" Her head nodded violently, and the fingers became as tiny snakes writhing in a nest of wool. "Yes, the house, sunlight, and wallpaper, and Miss Emily in the window." Miss Emily. The name was a verbal gem, and I grabbed it, rolled it across my brain, toyed with it, all but set it to music. "Tell me about Miss Emily." The old head came up, and the eyes filled with gentle reproach. "Everybody knows Miss Emily. Beautiful as a spring morning she is. Going to marry Mr. Ascot, she is." Again the violent nodding, The writhing fingers.
Was, only he never...
Never what? I prompted. What was it Mr. Ascot did not do? Now there was a shocked expression on the wrinkled face, as though I had spoken an unmentionable word or unearthed a secret that had been locked away in that dying brain for 70 years.
He never came, not when he should. Miss Emily didn't cry, just walked from the church back to the house and sat in the chair and waited.
I shuddered. A man who has spent a lifetime looking for gold and has suddenly stumbled into an untrapped mine could not have experienced the joy that momentarily robbed me of speech. At length I was able to repeat the one word. Chair. The old brain had found another memory trail.
Chair, yes. Old it was. The covering all tattered, and after he never came, not when he should. Miss Emily covered it herself. Clever she was with the needle. Never know it wasn't done by an expert. Well, that is fine work, Miss Emily, I said, and she laughed. She laughed until she cried.
So that was why the brocade was not very faded. It was not more than 50 or 60, 70 years old. It was very difficult to know the exact period the old woman was talking about, but it would seem to be somewhere back in her distant youth. I took a deep breath and dared to ask the final question. Miss Pirbright, did Miss Emily ever sit in the chair and beckon? I was not prepared for the look of terror that suddenly transformed the old face into a grimacing mask. The tiny mouth gaped, and I could see a shriveled tongue twisted up like a scrap of rotting leather, and a horrible sound came from the contorting throat, as though a scream were being strangled at birth. I patted her back, muttered soothing words, but she jerked away, took 2 shuddering breaths, then asked in a shrieking whisper,
How do you know? She beckoned.
Before I could improvise a suitable answer, she went on, as though I were not there, lost in some private nightmare that my question had brought back to life.
I came into the room. Moonlight it was, and Miss Emily was seated in that chair. I knew she'd done something dreadful. Face white as death, and God forgive me, I didn't want to move. Just stand there and gasp. Not scream, not then. And then she beckoned to me, hand up, fingers bending.
The harsh voice died away, and I growled, Go on, what happened?
I went to her, eyes glittering like lighted candles, smell of almonds, bottle on the floor. She said, I die in his arms.
That was all I could get from the old crone, and presently the nurse returned, and was none too pleased to find her in a state of near collapse. But I walked down the bluish-lined path on cushioned feet. I had solved the mystery. Miss Emily had committed suicide after being left at the altar. The truth was so farcical, so storybookish, that my ridiculous passion had died, like a hothouse plant exposed to a winter's frost. I was free. I entered the house and ran upstairs to my bedroom. Miss Emily, I had her name off pat now, was seated in the chair. Pale, beautiful face turned towards me, eyes glittering, arm raised, beckoning, begging a young Miss Pirbright to come forward and hear her final, nonsensical words. I stood by the door and laughed until the tears ran down my face, stamped, pounded, clenched fist against trembled legs, then screamed my contemptuous rage. If you had been there yesterday, my fine lady, I would have come to you, but not now. To die for love. You should have hated him, died for hate. That would have been worthwhile. Hate. Hate. I suddenly walked towards her, and the beckoning arm was more insistent now, sawing the air, jerking, her fingers opening and closing as if they were trying to grab a handful of departing life. I looked down into the pale face, once more confident, fearless, knowing exactly what was to be done. I spoke gently, as befits an intelligent man dealing with an unusual situation. Time image you may be, but I can't have you sitting there beckoning away for the rest of my life. The one sure way of bursting a bubble is to prick it. And without wasting further words or time, I turned about and sat on her. It should have worked. It really should. A time image can have no substance once a sane, intelligent, fearless man has planted his posterior into its lap. There should absolutely be nothing. But oh, most merciful God, in whose existence I have never believed, why were there solid legs beneath mine? And why did 2 arms crawl round my chest, and 2 cold hands seek my throat, and hot breath sear my neck? I kicked and screamed, tore at the confining arms, and gradually, so very slowly, she melted, became cold rubber, slimy flannel, tainted mist, and then nothing. A bad dream dispersed by the first light of a summer morning. I got up, grabbed that damned, thrice accursed chair, and smashed it against the nearest wall. I tore the brocade, pulled out the stuffing, broke the wooden frame, and then a skull rolled across the floor. A skeleton hand caressed my knee. No, there's no need for that. No need for straitjackets, syringes, or any other instruments of torture you've stacked away. I'm quite calm now, but you do realize she did it, don't you? Having killed him, she must have flattened him, or maybe dried him out, then stripped the chair down to its frame and folded the body up. Damn clever now you think of it. Fold legs under thighs, shove him down into the chair, torso and head fit very nicely into the back, arms into arms, get it, you see? Then she replaced all the stuffing, recovered the chair with a nice piece of new brocade, then died in his arms. But having done all that, why does she still sit here on that plain wooden chair and keep staring at me, beckoning? Beckoning!